The Subcommittee on Federal Law Enforcement will come to order. Welcome, everyone. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I recognize myself for the purpose of an opening statement. Today, the subcommittee convenes for the third time to confront the crisis of unaccompanied alien children, or UACs, who are left lost, unprotected, and vulnerable to exploitation by the immigration policies of the previous administration, the Biden administration. Last July, in our first hearing on this issue, we examined a report from the DHS Office of Inspector General exposing the Biden administration's drastic failure to track hundreds of thousands of these children once they left the federal custody and were turned into the arms of unvetted, often criminal sponsors. This past June, understanding that the damage ran deeper than even the DHS Office of Inspector General had exposed, we convened again, determined to uncover the full truth of the Biden administration's negligence at our southern border. An audit by HHS, released after the DHS report, revealed that during the Biden administration, the HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement conducted its required monitoring of UAC care facilities in Texas and Florida only 69% of the time. That same audit found that facility staff were routinely onboarded without background checks, opening the door to predators and traffickers alike in facilities meant to protect and care for children seeking refuge in our country. Today, the subcommittee widens its lens. Our first two hearings examined the UAC crisis, a humanitarian catastrophe, and the bureaucratic failures that enabled it. Today, we turn to the engine that has powered this crisis from the start: the cartels who built a multi-billion-dollar business around trafficking children, and the financial networks around the world that keep their profits moving. And I hope these financial networks across the world are tuned in today. The scale of this enterprise is staggering. In 2021 alone, early in the Biden administration, cartels made as much as $13 billion in revenue from smuggling people into the United States from Mexico. This trend continued throughout Biden's presidency. By January 2024, cartels were earning $32 million per week trafficking migrants across just one stretch of the Texas border. It was difficult to measure, and it remains difficult to measure, just how much American treasure was sucked into this pipeline of trafficking children into our country by the cartels. Unaccompanied children proved an especially profitable application of the cartel's business model. Because these children cannot pay smuggling fees themselves, cartels often collect payment from family members or sponsors to secure their passage. If that sounds like the sale of children, it's because it is the sale of children. That arrangement creates a debt that cartels all too often leverage to force children into forced labor or sexual exploitation once the child reaches the United States. To be clear, this is not merely a human trafficking crisis. The same transnational criminal organizations profiting from child trafficking are responsible for trafficking the fentanyl that killed 76,000 Americans in 2023 alone. This convergence of drug trafficking, human trafficking, and violence led President Trump to designate a number of cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, arming federal prosecutors with tools to combat trafficking that were unavailable under the Biden administration. Further complicating this picture is the rise of Chinese money laundering networks, or CMLNs, which have become a critical enabler of cartel trafficking operations. In August 2025, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, issued an advisory warning that these Chinese networks help cartels launder proceeds from fentanyl trafficking and human trafficking, causing significant harm to American communities. FinCEN's analysis of bank reporting between 2020 and 2024 identified more than 137,000 suspicious activity reports, or SARs, tied to CMLN activity. Again, that's Chinese money laundering networks, 137,000 suspicious activity reports generated by our banks tied to Chinese money laundering, totaling approximately $312 billion in suspicious transactions. Again, that was between 2020 and 2024. Unfortunately, our federal law enforcement agencies have been hampered by serious information sharing obstacles that prevent effective combating of this illicit financing. The Government Accountability Office has repeatedly found that Treasury and DHS fail to adequately share financial intelligence relevant to money laundering investigations. GAO has also found that agencies across the federal government remain unaware of one another's anti-trafficking responsibilities. If we're serious about dismantling cartels' financial infrastructure, we must close these gaps, and the Trump administration has already taken important steps to do just that. In addition to designating many cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, the Working Families Tax Cuts secured more than $108 million to hire additional child exploitation investigators and analysts at Homeland Security investigations. Meanwhile, the Trump Department of Justice has been leading a whole-of-government effort to safeguard UACs in the United States and bring those who are trafficking them to justice, which has already resulted in a number of high-profile indictments. These are welcome developments, but there's a tremendous amount of work to be done. Congress must ensure our federal agencies have the statutory authorities, resources, and interagency structures necessary to follow illicit money as aggressively as we pursue the traffickers themselves. We have assembled an expert panel today to learn about this crisis from the ground level. I look forward to today's discussions. At this point, I would recognize the ranking member representing my Democrat colleagues for the purpose of making an opening statement. However, we have no Democrats present. So I'm pleased to welcome today's panelists. Ms. Allie Hopper is a nationally recognized expert on human trafficking and the president and co-founder of Guard Against Trafficking, a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating human trafficking and child exploitation through field research, professional training, public education, and policy reform. Ms. Lagan Lundstrom is a nationally recognized expert on human trafficking and is the Chief Executive Officer of Polaris, leading national strategy, operations, and partnerships that integrate advocacy, research, and technology to prevent and disrupt trafficking. Mr. Louis DeTito is an illicit finance strategy consultant for Shenega Defense and Aerospace Solutions. He's a banking, law enforcement, and legal expert with a prolific track record of assembling and leading analytics and investigative teams to identify and dismantle criminal networks. We appreciate you being here today, all of you, and look forward to your remarks. Let me remind the panelists that we've read your written statement and it will appear in full in the historical record. Please limit your oral statement to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press a button on the microphone in front of you so that we can hear you when you speak. I now recognize Ms. Hopper for her opening remarks.
Chairman Higgins and distinguished subcommittee members, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Allie Hopper, and I am president co-founder of Guard Against Trafficking. Through field work and interviews with traffickers, cartel members, whistleblowers, law enforcement, and unaccompanied alien children themselves, my research partner, Dr. Jared Sadolski, and I have gained firsthand insight into how traffickers think and exploit our systems. My prior testimony addressed what we witnessed along the cartel-controlled southern border routes and what we later covered with HHS, ORR, contractors, transportation, and sponsor placement. Today, our work has taken us directly to the children who lived through those failures. Most recently, Guard interviewed David and Rebecca, siblings from Guatemala who came here as unaccompanied children. They were smuggled north by Balthazar, a trafficker who transported them in the backs of trucks, sometimes for days, with little food, water, or airflow. That journey created a debt later used to force them into labor. Deborah White, a case manager at the Pomona Fairplex, raised concerns that Balthazar, their proposed sponsor, was connected to numerous children and multiple addresses. Rather than resolve those concerns, the sponsor was changed to Maribel, an associate connected to the same apparent network. Rebecca was still a minor when she was sent across the country unaccompanied. She did not speak English or have a cell phone, and when she arrived, no sponsor or responsible adult was there to receive her. Instead, Maribel sent 3 men Rebecca had never met to pick her up. Rebecca was immediately put to work, repaying the smuggling debt and living expenses. She described working as much as 20 hours a day, preparing more than 100 meals daily for multiple residences. David was later released to the same network. At 15, he was forced into landscaping work. Both children worked 7 days a week, often sleeping only 2 to 4 hours a night on a ceramic floor or in a garage. They were denied school, adequate food and water, and were repeatedly moved between residences. DHS findings show their experience was far from isolated. By June 11th, the administration reported locating 146,000 unaccompanied children. Sit with that number for a second. More than 81,000 instances involving repeated sponsor addresses. More than 76,000 cases missing mandatory safety checks, and more than 97,000 cases lacking required background checks. American taxpayers funded a system intended to protect children, yet basic safeguards failed. David and Rebecca's story shows what happens when the system fails to protect the child. Kayla Hamilton's story shows what happens when it fails to protect the public. Kayla was a 20-year-old autistic woman murdered by Walter Javier Martinez, an MS-13 member who entered as an unaccompanied minor and whose criminal history in El Salvador was not identified before his release. A functioning system must distinguish victims from gang members and violent offenders before either the child or the public is harmed. In this case, it did not. Kayla is not coming back. Rebecca and David are still here, and we still have a chance to get this right for them and the next child. Javier Becerra led HHS during the historic UAC surge when many of these failures occurred. Congress pressed him for answers, yet he did not accept responsibility for what happened under his leadership. Leaving office does not erase that responsibility, and it should not end accountability for the failures that occurred under his watch. While the southern border is more secure, the criminal organizations empowered during those years have not disappeared. Our research shows that cartels like Sinaloa and CJNG are maintaining southern infrastructure while expanding northern land and maritime routes and exploiting jurisdictional and resource gaps across tribal lands. Confronting these networks requires federal, state, and local cooperation. A recent multi-agency operation in Florida recovered 163 missing children, half of whom I have personally verified were UACs. This shows what coordinated action can accomplish, and that same coordination must follow these criminal networks wherever they operate. That response must include both enforcement and protection. I continue to support stronger oversight, accountability, and agency reform while ensuring T visas and U visas remain accessible to qualifying victims like David and Rebecca. Ultimately, the American people deserve a government willing to identify what failed, correct it, and hold those responsible, including Secretary Becerra. Rebecca and David survived this system. Not every child does. That difference should not depend on luck. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank the gentlelady for her opening statement. I now recognize Ms. Lundstrom for her opening remarks.
Chairman Higgins and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to join you. I want to begin by being precise about the perspective Polaris brings to today's discussion. We are experts in human trafficking. We are not experts on the Unaccompanied Children Program, organized criminal networks, or Chinese money laundering networks independently. Our expertise is in what happens where those intersect with human trafficking and what survivors and communities tell us is happening to and around them. In our historical data, we identified 2,163 trafficking cases involving 3,064 foreign national minors in the United States. After nearly 25 years of listening to people experiencing trafficking, we know something critically important about how exploitation becomes visible. People facing profound vulnerability will share information about their experiences with the people and institutions that they trust. And that is why I want to talk to you today about trust. You see, I come to this conversation not only as CEO of Polaris, but as a survivor of human trafficking myself. During the 5 years I was exploited across 23 states, I had 45 contacts with law enforcement, including 11 arrests due to forced criminality. Not once was I screened for trafficking. I was unable at the time to identify what was happening to me. It took me years afterward to understand, much less disclose, what had happened. By the time I was ready, the statute of limitations had passed, and my traffickers could no longer be prosecuted. But I remember the institutions that made me feel heard before I was ready to share, and Polaris was one of those. Now, this experience does not make me representative of every survivor, but it makes two things very concrete for me. Consistent, effective screening matters because people experiencing trafficking may not yet be able to identify or disclose what is happening to them. And delayed identification can mean a lost opportunity for accountability. Trust is, therefore, not separate from trafficking intelligence. It is one of the conditions that makes that intelligence possible. Let's consider what we learned about these 3,064 young people in these cases. In more than a quarter of these cases, a family member or a caregiver was the recruiter. Many described withheld earnings, debt-related control, threats to report them to immigration authorities, or having their identification documents taken and destroyed. The people, resources, and systems these young people depended on were being weaponized by their traffickers to control them. In a separate analysis of Polaris's historical trafficking data, organized crime indicators appear in about 4% of cases, and only 1% identified a notable organized group by name. Those figures reflect what is known and shared with us, not the actual prevalence of organized crime in trafficking. They neither tell us organized crime is rare, nor justify presuming it underlies every trafficking case. A survivor may know who recruited them, withheld their wages, took their documents, or threatened them, but they may not know whether that person is connected to a cartel or where the money flows. The survivor's disclosure can begin an investigation, but it cannot carry the burden of proving the enterprise. So what does this mean for Congress? Before creating new authorities or expanding access to sensitive information, I would urge this subcommittee to consider the following 4 questions. First, are we consistently implementing the trafficking screening, identification, and protections that Congress already established? As we compare trafficking numbers across federal programs, we need to understand if and how people are being screened and identified in the first place, and whether those protections that follow are being implemented as intended. Different systems serve different service purposes and apply different evidentiary thresholds. A person may appropriately qualify for trafficking-specific protections or services long before there is sufficient evidence for a criminal investigation or prosecution. Second, what investigative question can law enforcement not answer today? Is it who was recruiting, where the money is moved, whether an individual is connected to an organized criminal network? Define the question before defining the data solution. Third, what information is actually necessary to answer that question? And fourth, how do we get that information to the investigator without undermining the systems through which trafficking becomes visible? It's the right question, the right information, the right actor, and the right purpose. Trust is part of America's trafficking intelligence infrastructure. Protecting it while giving law enforcement the visibility it needs to identify and disrupt the people and enterprises responsible for exploitation is how we build visibility that lasts. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady for her opening statement. I recognize Mr. Louis DeTito for his opening statement. How do you pronounce your last name, sir?
DeTito, sir.
DeTito. We've gotten it correct, but we've argued about how to say it, so thank you for clearing that up.
Chairman Higgins and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. The central national security threat addressed in this statement is permanence. Cartels, transnational criminal organizations, and Chinese money laundering networks are sophisticated criminal enterprises that use every available mechanism, including the exploitation of vulnerable children, to generate profit, evade detection, and insulate organizers from law enforcement, financial institutions, and government agencies. Child exploitation is one component of a broader portfolio that includes human trafficking, drug trafficking, fraud, scams, money laundering, labor exploitation, and other crimes. When these networks target unaccompanied children, a child's identity, labor, financial access, and apparent legitimacy may be used to insulate criminal organizers from illicit transactions, obscure beneficial control, and reduce network detection. Exploitation may begin at the border through sponsorship fraud, forced labor, debt bondage, identity theft, or trafficking, yet network control may continue into adulthood and create durable criminal infrastructure in the United States. I want to be clear, unaccompanied children are not the threat. The adversary is the criminal network willing to exploit children because of their age, dependency, lack of parental protection, legal vulnerability, and reliance on sponsors or handlers. From a financial standpoint, Chinese money laundering networks are central to this life cycle. They help commingle proceeds from human trafficking, labor trafficking, drug trafficking, fraud, scams, public funds fraud, and other crimes. And they layer those funds through U.S. financial institutions and global financial infrastructure and repatriate proceeds into U.S. banks, businesses, real estate, and other fixed assets. That process converts criminal revenue into a permanent presence in our communities and embeds criminal proceeds into lawful markets. In my casework, I have seen this pattern across illicit massage businesses, agricultural labor exploitation, illegal marijuana grow operations, staffing and transportation intermediaries, synthetic identity fraud, and the use of young adults as money mules or financial straws. These are not separate issues when viewed through a network lens. They are recurring mechanisms that allow cartels and CMLNs to profit, evade detection, and maintain access to the U.S. financial system. A border crossing, sponsorship application, labor site, bank account, or property purchase may appear unrelated when viewed in isolation. But when examined across the full life cycle, a clear pattern emerges. Money, identities, assets, enablers, and businesses operating together to sustain these organizations inside the United States. That's why my recommendations rest on 3 priorities, each aimed at the same objective: identifying and dismantling the criminal networks that convert exploitation into permanence. First, education. Investigators, financial institutions, and frontline agencies need continual training to recognize trafficking-related financial indicators as coordinated network activity, not isolated events. Second, framework. Task forces need repeatable workflows and integrate victim recovery, sponsor fraud, financial intelligence, record analysis, and interagency information sharing. Third, analytics. Agencies need network-level tools that identify repeated use of identities, accounts, properties, and businesses across time and jurisdictions. The threat is not the child. It's the network that exploits the child, monetizes identity, labor, and financial access, and turns those proceeds into a durable foothold inside the United States. That permanence is the national security threat. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank the gentleman for his opening statement, and I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to move rather quickly. Ms. Hopper, you bring a unique academic research to this committee, and we appreciate your continued testimony and your perspective. Much of your work, or some of your work, involves interviewing incarcerated gang members in Latin America prisons. Is that correct? And these are you've had unique access to interview men that have directed cartel operations that have resulted in the hundreds of thousands of children that we've been referencing here. Based on your research, could you just walk us through how does it happen? How does a child go from an innocent kid, underprivileged, challenged, but still an innocent kid, to in the grasp of that cartel pipeline and ultimately find themselves indebted to the cartels and unable to escape? Can you just walk us through that process?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. So what these traffickers and smugglers do is they exploit the hope, the vulnerable situations of these migrants. So when these migrants are looking for options for hope and they're met with messaging from a prior administration that the border is open, that we will welcome you with open arms, and that once you get here, you will have access to social programs, schooling, cell phones, your children will be taken care of and have opportunity.
So how does the cartel plug into that when they're still in the pipeline before they arrive here? And how does a cartel convince that child that the dreams that they have embraced are real?
There was a prime example of just the massive sheer volume of people crossing into the border and already verifying that they were getting access to these programs. So it really wasn't hard to message that. And as they went through their smuggling journey, they started accruing that debt and not understanding that that accrual was going to.
Okay, so that helps us to clarify. So you're basically confirming that the cartels were using the messaging of the prior administration's policies to reinforce the hope of belief in this the fantasy future that these kids wanted to embrace, and so you've effectively identified a network and spoken of it. Ms. Lundstrom, you said that you were trafficked across 23 states and you had regular interaction with law enforcement across those 23 states during your time of suffering trafficking yourself. Is that correct? And the law enforcement that you came into contact with, how would I ask you personally, and so I'd like you to follow up on this question here. I only have a minute and a half left, so please indulge me. How as a police officer, even when we knew, because I've encountered this myself, that you just know in your gut and your instinct, you're talking to a young lady or to a couple of young ladies, commonly in pairs, that they're being trafficked, but they're not interested. These are young adults, they have rights. You can't force them into participating in a criminal investigation into their own life. You can't compel them to participate in that. So how did you deal with law enforcement officers that tried to help across the 23 states?
That's a great question, Chairman Higgins, and I think it's important to also give some context to my trafficking and where it was situated in the history of human trafficking intervention and response in the United States. My trafficking happened between 2008 and 2012. At that time, the United States did not have consistent education and training for law enforcement to identify instances of human trafficking. And so I do think that it is a good example of, to your point, sometimes there are officers who have been trained and are able to identify suspected instances of trafficking, but until that training is conducted and mandated consistently, and
So
it is—
That's an excellent point. And to the lady's point of your observation, that's true. Just quickly, Mr. DeTito, I'm out of time here, but I hope my colleagues will indulge. Can you speak to the enhanced training that law enforcement receives now that they didn't receive a decade ago?
In my experience, it's more structured. I'd say more structured. And the education, I'd say from a framework perspective, I think those two work hand in hand, the education and the framework, because you can have education, but if you don't have an identified process on how to deal with X, how effective and consistent is it going to be? So I think now the training and the education that's gone out to law enforcement has been more consistent and more standardized on what to look for and how to handle what you're seeing in real time.
Yes, sir. We're trying to deal with it. My time has expired. I recognize Mr. Perry for 5 minutes for questioning. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane is recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to point out there's no Democrats in the room. You guys notice that, the witnesses on the panel today? Mr. Chairman, did you by chance forget to invite the Democrats to this hearing?
Well, I'm sometimes forgetful, sir, but we always officially notify the minority.
I figured
Yes,
you did, sir.
They've been invited.
It's weird because they're always the first ones to run to the microphone to talk about illegal immigrants, their children and well-being. Yet when it comes to this topic, UACs, they don't want to show up at all. I don't really think they care much. Ms. Hopper, who is profiting the most from these human trafficking operations?
It depends on what part of the chain that we're talking about. During the prior administration, I would say a lot of the NGOs that were granted millions and billions of dollars in awards and mishandled these programs and lost hundreds of thousands of children profited greatly. We're still waiting on accountability for those. And I would say the cartels profited greatly, and there is still a consistent demand for sex and labor of these UAC children.
Ms. Hopper, this isn't the first time you've testified before Congress, is it?
It is not.
Where does your knowledge come from, Ms. Hopper? Did you go online or social media or read a magazine or something?
No, unfortunately, under the prior administration, there wasn't much reporting, and so me and my business partner actually took it upon ourselves to see it for ourselves. We went to the border. We spoke with unaccompanied alien children themselves, men, women, children that were exploited along the journey. Violence, elements of organ harvesting even came up, and speaking to incarcerated traffickers themselves.
So you actually interviewed traffickers in prison who actually talked to you about their efforts to traffic humans into the United States?
Some incarcerated and some just when we were conducting research, yeah.
Yeah, it seems pretty reliable to me. Mr. DeTito, is that how you say your name?
DeTito, sir.
DeTito, you said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing here in your opening statement, the adversary is the criminal network that commits the human trafficking, something along those lines. Is that pretty accurate?
Yes, sir.
I would partially agree with that, but that's not really the full truth, is it? How about the politicians who orchestrated the opening of our southern border, who can't be bothered to show up here today and face the music and listen to experts? Do you think that they have any ownership in this catastrophe and all these missing kids?
I can't speak to who's here and who's not here. I can speak to my personal knowledge and my experience, and the criminal networks are like just in my personal knowledge and experience to blame.
Okay, you can't tell Mr. DeTito that there are no Democrats in the room?
I see nobody to my left.
Okay, all right, that's the case. And you don't know who opened the border 6 years ago? I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but you talked about the adversary, and I just want to make it really crystal clear for this entire room and all the Americans watching. We knew that this was going to be a part of what happened when you opened the border. Not even talking about, individuals on the terror watch list coming through the border, criminals coming through the border, excess fentanyl and drugs coming through the border. So I just want to make sure that that's really clear. Ms. Hopper, you and your partner in the past have described pamphlets that the cartels had. What information they contain, and what do they reveal about how cartels recruit, transport, and ultimately exploit children?
The pamphlets include information about NGOs that are friendly to illegal immigrants, so that when they get to the border, they're able to reach out to them to access social programs and services. They also include QR codes, often to encrypted Telegram channels where they can tell them specific points of entry and specific sanctuary cities and states that they can go to seek refuge and access more social programs.
Your work has also raised concerns about organ trafficking and harvesting. What evidence have you encountered supporting those concerns? Are children among the victims, and is there evidence connecting these crimes to trafficking routes into the United States?
One of the CJNG cartel members that we interviewed spoke about the unaccompanied alien children and those that were vulnerable, and if they needed an order to fill, no one was going to miss that child, and so they were able to fulfill those orders with those organs. There was another trafficker, Turco, who harvested the eye of a 12-year-old boy for, I believe it was $12,000 or $15,000, and that was also a boy that was on the journey on the way to the United States.
Thank you, Ms. Hopper. I yield back, but I think this testimony is exactly why the Democrats aren't here today.
The gentleman yields. I thank him for being here. Mr. Sessions is recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you to each of our witnesses who are here. I think that this issue is one that certainly has garnered the attention of both Republicans and Democrats from a perspective of the sadness that is associated with it. And yet, I think, as has been noted, Mr. Chairman, you are holding this hearing today with little support from others except your team, who maintains a strong interest in this issue, and I want to thank you very much for doing this. I'm from Waco, Texas, and have had a chance for the last number of years to be associated with Unbound Now, which is an organization that places itself in a position to understand, as several of you are, the international implications of war, migration, any famine, things that where lots of people cross borders, certainly in the Ukraine war with the atrocities that the Russians have been a part of. But I'd like to focus my views and activities off the things which you have really focused us on, and that is the United States of America. The things which have not only provided sad stories about, and certainly we've seen them as these children going back to the first Trump administration, thousands of them following up on the Biden administration, following up on the Obama administration, the way that they dealt with the influx of people. And I think that the point that I would make, and perhaps Congressman Crane made, was a policy that allowed so many people to come here, created misery and conditions by which these things could flourish. When you bring people into the country that are unaccompanied minors, when you allow them thousands at a time simply for the purposes the Biden administration did in particular, allowing people just to come in and not even care enough about trying to figure out who belongs to who and what those conditions might be. Ms. Hopper, you're here because you've taken time to be here. Several years ago, we received a good bit of information about some 700,000 to 800,000 children that were lost, had been lost by federal law enforcement. And could you give us an update on that status that I assume happened during the Biden administration rush to overwhelm America?
Absolutely. When you have the sheer volume of children that came into this country and all of a sudden under a prior administration, they are simply unaccounted for, you don't know whether they're missing, lost, exploited, perfectly okay, or still alive. And that is absolutely unacceptable. There was a hearing where, at the time, Secretary Siobhan Harris, head of Department of Children and Families in Florida, was asking for the addresses of where these children were sent to Florida. And the prior administration stonewalled her. She, as in her position and capacity, was unable to do welfare checks on the children sent to her state. So not only were we unable to account for those children, the information was siloed within the federal agency, not shared with state agencies, but pulling in taxpayer dollars to pay for these children to be lost. And now resources have to be spent to locate them, make sure they're okay, and address this situation.
And those children have been here a while, and once again, while being trafficked, find themselves moving around the country with incredible odds against their success. Tell me what is presently done, Ms. Landstrom, about, in your opinion, about finding these children in a concerted effort by the federal government to find them, and what happens when they do, which I don't know. What is the answer? Do we allow them to stay in this country? Do we try and repatriate them to their former country? Do we find their parents? What is that process?
Well, I certainly cannot speak in full to how to address every single situation involving an unaccompanied child, but I would like to highlight two things. First of all, the number one vulnerability to an individual being trafficked at any point in their life is growing up in poverty. And so making sure that we're addressing vulnerabilities early on for families and their children. Really, secondly, again, making sure that individuals are screened and afforded the protections as victims if and when they are determined to be victims so that they can access those resources and support, and making sure those are delivered consistently to all children.
In the state of Texas, which is my home, the Texas Department of Public Safety as well, sheriffs have a large part of their job when they encounter a car that they pull over or someone that they encounter to make sure that they in some way separate these children and to figure out who belongs to who. The conditions that children may be in, the conditions that they may seek our assistance. Mr. Tino?
DeTito.
DeTino, can you provide any part of this of understanding about how important local law enforcement is, how important it is that this be a huge part of their responsibility as this trafficking occurs across major
The gentleman's
areas?
time has expired, but Mr. DeTito can answer the question. and
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
So I could say, just going back to the education and the training and being able to recognize what is in front of you. Things happen quickly when you're in law enforcement. Just being able to recognize it immediately upon making contact, whether you're inside a residence or make contact with driver occupants of a vehicle, just being able to recognize it as quickly as possible. And if you're not sure, being able to ask for assistance.
Mr. Chairman, I really want to thank you for what you're doing here today. I think that the evidence by the members that have shown up today offer great satisfaction to your thirst to get closer to this issue. As a former member of law enforcement, I think that you are very close to this and recognize how important it is. And I want to thank you very much for your professionalism today and that of our panel.
I thank my friend, and we recognize Mr. Perry for 5 minutes for questioning.
I thank the chairman. I thank the witnesses. Mr. DeTito, FinCEN's analysis of Bank Secrecy Act reports between 2020 and 2024 identified over 100,000 suspicious activity reports and about $312 billion in suspicious transactions, some of them coming from the Communist Party of China. Can you kind of draw or lay a trail of crumbs for us about where that money's going, and if it has anything to do with with child exploitation and child trafficking?
Thank you for the question, sir. To shed a little bit of light on this, much of the reporting is aggregator accounts. So if you're not familiar with an aggregator account, it is a combination of multiple different crimes, criminal proceeds, ending up in the same account. So we're talking drug trafficking, human smuggling, et cetera. Scam and romance scam and investment scam activity is extremely prevalent and weighs heavily in that number, especially right now. So I could say, in my experience, yes, absolutely. The proceeds of human trafficking, illicit massage businesses, human smuggling network operations, illegal marijuana grow operations in the U.S., those proceeds end up in the U.S. financial system. If there is an intermediary stop overseas into global financial institutions in Southeast Asia, there's usually a jump back into the U.S. financial system to purchase fixed assets. And that is my biggest fear, is that over time, these billions and trillions of dollars add up and we are losing our wealth little by little. Not only the victims of the scams who are losing their retirement to the Southeast Asian networks, but also they're turning around the networks and injecting those proceeds and criminal proceeds of all the other behavior I described into a permanent presence in the US. And it's escalating year over year.
What's the one thing? What is the one thing, if you could do anything, regarding this illicit funding, particularly specifically coming from and through the Communist Party of China and dealing with human trafficking and the smuggling of children in particular? What's the one thing, if you could do anything, that you could do to make a difference?
Identify the people actually responsible, and the way the schemes are set up with enablers. When I say enablers, I mean accountants, attorneys, investment bankers. The sophistication of these networks never ceases to amaze me. So if I could identify who's actually behind it.
Are these all folks that are overseas, or are they under the jurisdiction of the United States of America?
I believe both.
And we don't have the tools necessary to figure out who they are and prosecute them?
We have tools, and I'm going to go back to the education and the framework, because we need repeatable processes to show that, okay, the group in Los Angeles and the group in New York, they function similarly, but are we sharing information? We do a great job in law enforcement of sharing information, but it could be better. And when you layer financial intelligence into that picture, you're talking grand jury secrecy and sharing financial information, you get additional secrecy barriers as well, and information sharing barriers. So those are some of the barriers, and the higher you go in the network are the more indispensable members of the network. They're the people we need to go after, because a lot of times at the very bottom level of the network, you are seeing compromised victim identities on the bank accounts, and they're responsible for the accounts. You know, so that's also part of my statement, is that it's not always as obvious as it would seem by the way the networks are structured.
Okay. Ms. Hopper, I want to ask you another question. You can elaborate on that answer if you want to as well. The NGOs, so-called NGOs, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but probably going to a little bit, and if you want to refine that, you can, but I suspect they've used and been given a lot of American tax dollars to facilitate the crossing of the border of unaccompanied minors and the placement, 31,000 at least, without an address, without a point of contact, literally placed by the United States government at taxpayers' expense. We don't know where they are. We don't know who had them. We don't know anything about them, and likely horrific things that are unimaginable to all of us. Was it the duty of the NGO to safeguard the welfare of the child in exchange for compensation by the American taxpayer under some provision of law or some program which the NGO was participating in? Or was it solely the government's job to safeguard the welfare of the child?
I think that when you look at the contracts of the grants and you see the scope and the requirements, that is where the auditing of these contracts is extremely important, because that should identify whose responsibility it is, who is responsible for reporting these numbers, and when you have an NGO that outsources that responsibility, who is maintaining the responsibility and therefore the liability of providing that information. So when you're vetting sponsors and addresses and you outsource that responsibility as an NGO to a third party, who maintains liability?
In your estimation, who's more liable, more responsible, who has failed more, the United States government or the NGOs? If you could characterize it, and if you can't, that's okay too. But somebody failed here, whether it was by design, they just didn't care, or they were incompetent. But somebody has failed on a grand scale, on an unimaginable, I can't think of one child having this stuff happen to them, let alone thousands and tens of thousands of them. Who was it?
I would say that it would be the U.S. government responsible for managing Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement, Unaccompanied Alien Children Program. And under that administration, it was Javier Becerra. So when you award a grant to a nonprofit or an organization, it is still your responsibility to make sure that those requirements are met. And at the end of the day, that is where the responsibility lies. But I did want to touch on your question from previous too. So there are those more digital financial components that DeTito was talking about. But one of the things that we haven't been able to get a handle on too is the outbound transfer of bulk cash, weapons. And so I think that monitoring vehicles into the interior of the country is important, but also monitoring.
Can you clarify outbound and interior of which country?
So when you're talking about the southern border, and we have very strict processes for monitoring those that are coming into the interior of the country.
To the United States, you mean?
Correct.
Yes.
But are those same processes and security protocols being applied to vehicles leaving the country? And so the person that we spoke to, Jay Flores,
cash.
who was part of the Sinaloa cartel, was saying that that same level of security needs to be applied to vehicles and commercial vehicles that are leaving the country, because that is where the bulk currency and where the weapons are able to be disrupted. You can disrupt them coming into the interior of the United States, but if you're not able to seize the financial assets and the bulk cash leaving, that is where we can also help, deter these efforts and disrupt these efforts.
I thank the chair. I yield.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Gosar is recognized for questioning for as much time as it
Thank
may
you.
consume.
I'm going to parlay off of my colleague here. Ms. Hopper, do you believe that these NGOs should be audited, particularly if it should be mandated that if they take a penny from the federal government, either directly or indirectly, they should show where they get all their money?
I absolutely do. If I am reporting my taxes to the IRS and I don't get anything exactly right, I get audited. So as an American citizen, and those are my taxpayer dollars, I believe that anyone accepting taxpayer money should be audited and should be held accountable if they are not able to provide the proper receipts or documentation.
You were talking about inbound and outbound. That's what happened in Fast and Furious, was it not? It goes all the way back to Obama,
Yeah.
So that's pretty crazy. Mr. DeTito, how many consulates does Mexico have in the country?
I'm not aware, sir.
50. What's the next closest? Great Britain and China at 8. Why so many? Aren't they part of the problem? And I guess where I'm going to go with this question is the cartels and the legislators in Mexico, they're interchangeable, right?
I don't have firsthand knowledge of that.
Okay. So when we go for an audit to find out how much money goes into the Mexican government, we can't get any answers. Can you give us some forensics on how to maybe go about doing our job better?
Are you asking me for advice on how to do so?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. To track the funds?
Yep. See, I've been on this track because I feel like I was telling Mrs. Hopper, I think all NGOs should be tracked. We're finding a lot of this money going out of the executive branch, and that's very hard to track that money. So how do you do that?
Ownership. I think ownership of the companies and the beneficiaries. Because if there's funds going to X entity, trace the entity, trace the ownership, and what do they do with the funds?
So now would you agree, like Ms. Hopper did, that all NGOs, or if you're taking money from the federal government, even in an award, you should be followed? You should have to give way to just describing where that money came from, where you get all your money? Would that be a way to track it?
That would be a way to track.
Okay. Well, China's involvement. How do you see China and Mexico working together?
I see them working together as a collaborative effort to meet each other's needs. The cartels have a need to launder bulk cash in the U.S., and the Chinese money laundering networks, they pick up the contracts and they will launder for very low low percentage, under 1% typically.
Say that again?
And yeah, they'll do it for a variety of reasons, but most of it comes to trade-based money laundering, manufacturing, because they can then turn the dollars and the bulk cash either back to manufactured goods, like cheaply manufactured goods in China.
So in
ship them
essence, we're
here.
strangling ourselves. Like we were talking, the money's going out and we're getting weaker and weaker and less strong economically.
Yes, absolutely.
I wonder if that's really the grand plan. What do you think, Ms. Hopper?
Yeah, I do.
Do you think the same thing, Mr. DeTito?
I think over time, it's going to erode our entire societal infrastructure. It's putting pressure on most metropolitan housing markets. A lot of cash purchases by Chinese investors.
Well, I know I'm from Arizona, so we saw this influx, this huge influx. We're trying to explain this, what happened, why it happened, and why it continues to happen, okay? It may be children at this edge, it's maybe drugs, it may be manufacturing, all this other different things working together. But I do see a problem now coming about with China and Mexico. I think this is our #1 target area of problems in the world for us. I think Iran may have been, but I think Mexico is the next one. You look at water in the Southwest, I mean, if you have water, you have life. If you don't have water, you don't have life. We had a problem in the Rio Grande, we had a problem in the Colorado River Compact, both with Mexico, haven't honored their contract until recently. And so it makes more of a compliment to that process. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And just in my experience regarding the water concerns, that caused a migration of the illegal marijuana farms to other areas of the country that do have better water supply, like northeast Oklahoma and northwest Arkansas, Maine.
California,
Yep,
public lands.
public land. That plays into the human trafficking piece, human smuggling, human trafficking, illicit drug activity, and laundering proceeds into U.S. real estate.
Ms. Hopper, you brought up Javier Becerra. Do you think there should be criminal charges applied here?
Criminal, civil, full assessment of anyone that he was responsible for.
It's total dereliction of duty, right?
Absolutely.
It's a wanton disdain for the law. Well, I tell you what, this is incredible. It's sad to say that children have to pay the price over and over and over and over again. Sad, really sad. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this hearing, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields. I have an additional question if my colleagues do not object. Ms. Lundstrom, you stated that you had been trafficked across 23 states. I'm going to come back to this because it's a fascinating observation, and you're an incredible human being for being seated here today, having gone through what you've gone through, and yet here you are, squared away, speaking at Congress. So some of this may be painful, but if you were trafficked across 23 states, and Mr. DeTito describes a permanence of the criminal enterprises, and Ms. Hopper describes network homes, networks of homes that were used. In what way, from your unique perspective, could law enforcement at the local, state, and federal level work together using every clue, including financial trails and shared communications between local, state, and federal law enforcement, how can we identify the addresses so that we can hit those homes with task forces put together by local, state, and federal law enforcement? These guys are ready to go, but you have to have a warrant to hit that home. You have to have evidence to present in probable cause to a judge to get a warrant to hit that home. You have to do it fast, or it's going to be vacant. So, in your experience across the 23 states, if you had to look back a state at a time, could you identify like where you were?
The criminal enterprises that trafficked me were not cartels. They were different structures. And so I don't know that I can speak
I get that.
on
It
that
was
personal
it was a
experience.
different demographic,
Yeah.
but if you were looking back to try to identify addresses for law enforcement to investigate, could this be done? And then, Ms. Hopper, you may have some answer to this question as well. Let me move to Ms. Hopper.
So we train all levels of law enforcement, and I think it's extremely important that that training doesn't just apply to seasoned sex crimes detectives, but road patrol, because honestly, road patrol is one of the first levels of response and able to identify potential indicators of someone that's in distress and could potentially be in a very dangerous situation or human trafficking situation. They need to understand the difference between prostitution and human trafficking, sex trafficking. Often those terms are referred, more people are comfortable with referring to things as prostitution, and they don't expand that line of questioning or investigation beyond this appears to be prostitution, and I'm not going to look any further into human trafficking. The questions at intake will absolutely help with that, addressing the demand, because we are a demand-based country, and so we are one of the highest buyers in the entire world, so addressing the demand. And lastly, encouraging prosecutors, state's attorneys, district attorneys, and judges to get on board, because law enforcement can make all the arrests that they want, but if prosecutors don't take up these cases and show a sense of courage and bravery to try these cases and not offer plea deals with slaps on the wrist or judges that let violent criminals out on the street to reoffend, this is why it's a multifaceted approach, a multi-agency approach. And we need to have law enforcement have the support, but it can't just rely on law enforcement, because law enforcement is doing what they can. They need the support of their attorneys and prosecutors.
We need to prosecute. And Mr. DeTito, this is sort of a sidebar question, but are you aware of any use of AI to connect these dots, the financial, the streams of money, the known addresses, suspected addresses, known actors, to connect this, the infrastructure of this network in an identifiable manner?
Yeah, one thing about AI, of course it's possible, but the framework is more important than the actual analytics itself, because the false positive rate, and if you don't know what you're looking at and training the AI to produce the intended outcome, you may totally miss the mark. So you need to train the education piece. You still need to train the detectives, the operators, the analysts, the agents.
Understood.
To understand what you're looking for, how to address it, finally the analytics.
I thank the
But yes,
gentleman.
it is possible, sir.
Do any of my colleagues have additional questions? We do have a colleague that is perhaps en route. He is en route. So I'm going to indulge with a further question along identifying this network and breaking it. A man told me, man, this was probably 15 years ago. Before Congress, I was a full-time police officer, that to break the back of the cartels, you had to start arresting bankers. said, if you can stop their money, they'll start eating each other. His words, not mine. And that kind of chaos to create within the networks. Now we're talking about the Chinese and their laundering of cash and exchanging cash for cheap, durable goods coming into the country and products that act as cash, basically, in the laundering process. I think the gentleman 15 years ago was accurate. Mr. DeTito, how do we break their financial back? How can we put bankers in jail?
It's really difficult, and it's multifaceted, and I'll tell you why. Because the enablers that the cartels and the Chinese money laundering networks use, there's always plausible deniability. When you get into investigating asset protection attorneys, or you get into investigating investment bankers, what is their actual knowledge? So it becomes difficult. Even if you identify the enablers who are creating the shell companies in Tortola and Cayman Islands and Panama and moving assets on behalf of these criminal networks, addressing it from a law enforcement perspective becomes very difficult. So I would urge even to get creative, you bring in Treasury Department. There's other mechanisms besides indictments. One of these investigations could take
Like
5 to 5
economic
years.
leverage?
Yeah, economic leverage. State Department
Tariffs.
has levers on travel restrictions. There's other mechanisms that you could get to way faster than a 5-year investigation followed by indictment.
Legitimate point. I yield some time to Mr. Gosar has an additional question.
Yeah, if you had your way, Mr. DeTito, how would you do this? The chairman actually alluded to it. Now, what would you do to handle this? If it's your world and it's 100% you do.
I'm just cautious about how much I would actually say in a public setting.
Okay.
And I would address the enablers. I would address the enablers because they're the indispensable members of any money laundering organization, the people who are transacting at the financial centers, the banks. They're disposable to the networks. As horrible as it sounds, some of them are victims bordering suspects, if that makes sense. So the higher you go, expose the enablers.
So would you even put like I hate to say this, but a bounty?
I'm not sure about a bounty, but I would definitely focus my efforts investigatively and analytically on the enablers.
Ms. Hopper, would you have an idea about that?
Just that, Mr. DeTito, when you say enablers, who are you exactly referring to?
I'm referring to the professionals, such as those with licenses that are assisting the networks.
Accountants, attorneys,
Yeah.
Realtors, investment bankers.
realtors.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
Yield time to Mr. Perry.
So I want to grind it down a little bit further. Mr. DeTito, you worked for the Bank of America, didn't you?
I did previously, yes, sir.
Were you there when the Bank of America was issuing credit cards to illegal foreign nationals in the United States of America?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that program. I worked in proactive organized crime detection and proactive analytics.
Just out of curiosity, look, for people that, work for a living, get a W-2, buy a car, make their mortgage payments, and maybe you got a small business, you got a machine shop, you got a mechanics, operation, flower shop or something, you got deposits, you're paying your mortgage, you're paying your driver, you're paying for, your business stuff. It's all low-level stuff, right? But the stuff you're talking about, China has a $50,000 cap on money that can be, on cash that can be brought back, right? So, and we're talking huge, the number I outlined for you was over $100 billion, right? And they want to convert that into cash at some point. It seems to me, I hate to say it, but the Bank of America, like they were issuing credit cards to illegal foreign, they know that was a market, that was a profit center for the Bank of America to issue credit cards to known illegal aliens in the United States of America. They sound like an enabler to me. I imagine that there are, I don't want to be making life difficult for my local community bank, and they already have a bunch of regulators in there since we set up all these different regulatory agency under the last couple administrations. But it seems to me that especially with, we're getting data centers forced down our throat, we're hearing about artificial intelligence every day. It seems to me that the Treasury Department and banks, when I say banks, I'm talking about the big ones that are dealing with these massive transactions, ought to be able to use that to break down these networks with multiple layers of ownership, transactions, countries, and figure out this isn't your normal franchise operation where, a couple partners own a few businesses and, they're selling tractor parts or something like that. These organizations have overseas implications and connections that are hooked to the United States of America, and they move huge amounts of money. Do you suspect, or is there some kind of window that you can show us where this is going to improve our lives as opposed to us being slaves to this artificial intelligence? We hear how it's going to take our jobs away, and that's what people hear. But is there a possibility that we can actually use this to our advantage to catch these people that exploit these children in our country from abroad?
Yes, I think there is, and as long as there's human in the loop, and humans are making the final determination on what action needs to be taken, then artificial intelligence could absolutely expedite going through trillions of dollars in monthly transactions.
Do you know if Treasury, if Homeland Security, if any one of these government agencies is looking particularly towards using artificial intelligence to do exactly what you just said? Is there any program, is there any agency that is doing that? Which one should be doing that?
I think all of them should be, and I believe they are using it at least in the capacity that they're able, because there are explainability issues for any criminal investigation that ends up in court. So, of course, being responsible and understanding inputs and outputs, I believe, is sort of you would say, a barrier to use.
I mean, we saw a pile of suspicious activity reports, right, by Hunter Biden, the Chinese Communist Party, Ukraine, et cetera. Somehow, none of the money could ever be tracked. It was never, we literally knew at least one end of the transaction. We might not have known the other one, but we probably put things together. We knew where he went, who he talked to, but yet nothing. We can't continue to see that, and I'm not saying that's your job to adjudicate that, but that's the kind of stuff the American people don't understand, and neither do I. They want some accountability for criminal activity in this regard, and it seems like if you can catch Al Capone without AI, you should be able to catch some of these people with AI. I'll yield.
The gentleman yields. I have a final question regarding the suspicious activity reports. 137,000 is a striking number, and suspicious activity reports, most of us didn't know what a suspicious activity report was, because until we started investigating the hundreds of them that the Biden family had with money, and we came to understand that this is a report produced by a bank when there's suspicious activity in your account that appears to be criminal and not not connected to a legitimate business, the appearance of money and from overseas accounts and from odd accounts. So 137,000 suspicious activity reports, Chinese money laundering network associated suspicious activity reports produced by banks. Mr. DeTito, what's your assessment of how's the United States government doing with that? 137,000 suspicious activity reports. I mean, if Congress can track the money of the Biden criminal operation from money from China, we did pretty good on this committee tracking that money. You would think that the power of the entire federal government, when you have a massive number of suspicious activity reports coming from our own banks, directly tied to Chinese money laundering networks, connected to human and child trafficking and drug trafficking and money laundering in our country. What's your assessment, Mr. DeTito, of how the United States government is doing with that?
First, I'd like to point out that that number is probably low compared to the overall activity. There are the reports that were filed that were known or suspected.
Well, we are
related to that.
conservatives, so we like to be conservatives in our estimation, so give it a shot.
Okay. Law enforcement does review almost all of these SARs and intelligence. Making sense of it is not always easy. And some of it is foreign-owned, foreign-controlled accounts. So it's easier to address the U.S.-owned, U.S.-based accounts. Then you have other issues such as foreign access to U.S. accounts. Now, if you're U.S. law enforcement, of course we have reach in partnerships and locations in other countries, but not every country in which these networks operate from. So just because you have a bank account at a U.S. financial institution does not mean you are located in the U.S. That's one of the issues, and especially true for some of the larger.
Let me ask for your perspective. We're talking about 137,000 suspicious activity reports, many more. Okay, but it's a big number. Most of these SARs are generated by big banks, or are any of these out of like what we would call community banks, small banks?
It could be both, big banks, small banks, cryptocurrency exchanges.
So would you recommend that Congress takes a look at enhanced regulatory investigative effort into banks that have generated multiple SARs and out of the Chinese money laundering network arena?
I think we should take, I'm sure FinCEN has done this, but take the 100,000+ SARs and figure out the common denominators and start from there, then feed the information back to the banks as to this is how you improve detection. Because the one thing about the Chinese networks especially is that the full life cycle of criminal activity and laundering is rarely ever, if ever, at one bank. They'll purposely set up accounts at 47 banks or 30 banks throughout the country, local and credit unions and regional banks with the same name or with the same company name, and layer the funds between
How about
one
we
bank,
put
another
undercover
bank, another
agents
bank.
inside those banks?
So they
Yeah, put me in charge for about 10 minutes, find out what happens. Listen, we're going to close unless my colleagues have anything further. I'd like to thank our panelists once again for appearing today. Really important, significant testimony that is now part of the permanent record of our country and our effort on this committee to investigate the horror of child trafficking in our country. I would yield to the ranking member for closing remarks, but we have no Democrats present. And I thank you all once again, and this subcommittee on federal law enforcement of the Oversight Committee is now adjourned.